There's a house on Willow Road just outside the edge of town that everyone avoids. It's one of those places that people talk about in hushed tones, a relic of a past no one really remembers but everyone fears. It's been abandoned for as long as anyone can recall, its windows boarded up, its yard overgrown with weeds and brambles. Most people in town pretend it doesn't exist, but if you listen closely, you'll hear the stories, the whispered warnings to stay away, the tales of those who went in and never came out the same. I've always been the curious type, the kind of person who needs to see things for myself. So when my friends and I were looking for something to do on a cold October night, I suggested we check out the house on Willow Road. It was just a joke at first, something to stir up a little excitement. But then Mike, never one to back down from a challenge, said we should go for it. "Come on, it's just an old house," he said, grinning like a fool. "What's the worst that could happen?" We all laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. Even I felt it, that little knot of unease in my stomach. But no one wanted to be the one to chicken out, so we grabbed our flashlights, piled into Mike's truck, and headed out to Willow Road. The drive was short, just a few minutes outside of town, but it felt like we were crossing some invisible line. The road grew narrower and rougher, the trees thicker and more twisted, until we finally saw it. The house, standing alone at the end of a long dirt driveway. Even in the dark, you could see how old it was, how the years had taken their toll. The roof sagged in places, the paint was peeling off in long strips, and the front porch looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard. We parked the truck at the edge of the driveway, the headlights casting long shadows across the yard. No one spoke as we got out and approached the house, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our feet. The air was cold and still, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. We stood there for a moment, just staring at the house. It looked different up close, more menacing somehow, like it was waiting for us. The windows were covered with old, rotting boards, but I could feel something watching us from behind them. My skin prickled, and I could tell the others felt it too. But Mike, always the fearless leader, stepped forward and tried the front door. It was locked, of course, so he moved to one of the windows, prying off the boards with the crowbar he'd brought. The wood gave way with a groan, and he pushed the window open, the stale air from inside rushing out to meet us. "Ladies first," Mike said, grinning as he gestured for us to go in. No one moved. "Come on," he said, his voice a little less sure now. "It's just a house." Reluctantly, we climbed through the window, one by one, into the dark, musty interior. The room we entered was what used to be a living room, I think, though it was hard to tell. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the furniture was so old and decrepit that it seemed ready to fall apart at any moment. The air was thick and heavy, and the darkness seemed to swallow our flashlight beams, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I looked around. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that presses in on you, that makes you feel like you're being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. "Let's check out the rest of the place," Mike said, his voice breaking the silence. He was trying to sound confident, but I could hear the tension in his words. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all scared. We moved through the house slowly, our footsteps echoing off the walls. The place was a maze of narrow hallways and small, cramped rooms, each one more decayed and unsettling than the last. There was something wrong with the air in there. It was too thick, too still, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. And the smell. It was like the house itself was rotting from the inside out. The farther we went, the worse the feeling got. It was like the house was alive, like it was breathing us in, watching us. I started to hear things. Soft whispers just at the edge of hearing, footsteps that didn't belong to any of us. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just the dark and the dust. We came to a set of stairs leading up to the second floor. The wood was so old and brittle that I was sure it would collapse under our weight, but Mike insisted on going up. The stairs creaked and groaned with every step, but they held. and soon we were standing in a long, dark hallway that stretched out into the shadows. The doors on either side were closed, the wood swollen and warped with age. Mike tried the first one, but it was stuck fast. The wood jammed in the frame. He moved to the next, and this one opened with a loud, grating creak that echoed down the hall. The room beyond was small, just a bedroom, but something about it felt off. The air was colder in there, the smell stronger, more nauseating. The bed was still there, covered in a moldy, tattered blanket, and the walls were stained with something dark that I didn't want to think about. But it wasn't the room that caught my attention. It was the feeling, a deep, bone-chilling dread that settled over me as soon as I stepped inside. It was like the room was suffocating me, pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just knew in that moment that we needed to get out of there. "Guys, I don't like this," I said, my voice shaking, "and we should go." Mike turned to me, and I could see the fear in his eyes, though he was trying to hide it. "It's just a room," he said, but his voice was unconvincing. He didn't believe it either. But then, from somewhere deep in the house, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It was the kind of sound that makes your heart stop, that primal, instinctual terror that grips you and won't let go. We all froze, our eyes wide with fear. The growl came again, closer this time, echoing down the hallway, like something was coming for us. "Run," I whispered, though my voice felt distant, like it wasn't even mine. We bolted, racing down the hallway back toward the stairs. The house seemed to close in around us, the walls narrowing, the darkness growing thicker. I could hear the others behind me, their footsteps pounding on the floorboards, but all I could think about was getting out, getting away from whatever was in that house. We stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling as the old wood cracked and splintered beneath our weight. The growl followed us, louder now, closer. It was right behind us, just out of sight, but I didn't dare look back. We reached the living room, and Mike was the first to reach the window. He dove through it, hitting the ground outside hard, but he didn't stop. He was up in a flash, running for the truck. I followed, practically throwing myself through the window, landing in the wet grass. The rain had started again, coming down in sheets, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was getting to the truck, getting away from that place. We all piled into the truck, slamming the door shut, and Mike floored it, tearing out of there as fast as the old engine would take us. We didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove until we were back in town, the lights of the houses and streets finally bringing a sense of safety that had been missing in that dark, cursed place. For a while, no one said anything. We just sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The truck was silent, except for the rain hammering against the roof and the sound of our ragged breaths. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice low and shaken. "What the hell was that?" None of us had an answer. We just sat there, staring at each other, each of us knowing we'd seen something that we couldn't explain, something we didn't want to believe was real. But it was. We all felt it, all heard it. That growl, that feeling of something in the house with us, something that shouldn't have been there. We never talked about that night again, not really. We tried to brush it off as just our imaginations, a trick of the mind in an old creepy house. But deep down, we all knew the truth. There was something in that house, something dark and ancient, something that was still there, waiting. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the house, feel that oppressive dread wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I started hearing things, soft whispers in the dead of night, creaking floorboards in an empty room. The sound of that growl haunted me, echoing in my mind, a reminder that there are things out there that we don't understand, things that are better left alone. I never went back to Willow Road, never even drove past it. I couldn't. Even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers, a shadow that refuses to fade. Sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind is just right, I think I can still hear it. The growl, deep and guttural, calling me back to that house. And I know, with a bone-deep certainty, that if I ever do go back, I won't be leaving again. There are places in this world that are better left alone, forgotten, because once you've opened that door, there's no closing it again, and whatever you find inside will never let you go.